Wolfang is a side-scrolling shooter that was originally released in the arcades. It eventually saw a home release for both the Sega Saturn and PlayStation 1 that managed to improve and alter certain aspects of the experience. One of the features that stand out is the sheer amount of customization that's afforded to the player. Each mech that you come to control can be fully altered. You can select its type of legs that affect its overall speed and jump height, as well as its type of weapons, which can make a huge difference. And you're not stuck with anything that you've chosen to use, as upon being destroyed there is the option of selecting the same loadout or going right back to the drawing board to select just what is needed for the current situation. If your mech is destroyed, your pilot will fly out of the machine and give the player a second chance of staying in the fight. In order to do this, you have to locate specific power-ups that result in you being rewarded another mech. It's a neat little system that manages to keep the player engaged and really comes into play during some of the more challenging levels the game presents. Speaking of levels, this is another area where Wolfang offers a sense of freedom to the player. There's a series of branching paths that all range in difficulty and provide your means of achieving one of the 12 different endings that are included in the game. It's a really generous package and is something that will not only satisfy fans of the genre, but also newcomers alike. Tiny Tank sees you taking on the role of an AI tank named Tiny. It all takes place in the future where humanity have explored the idea of letting machines fight their wars for them. It's all absolute insanity if I'm being honest, but it does set things up to provide a stage for the gameplay, which is what Tiny Tanks gets so right. As the player, you have access to a generous amount of options when it comes to taking on each level. The wide array of weaponry is the main key to your success, and a lot of it can be acquired from fallen enemies who drop various parts upon being defeated. From AI systems that act as upgrades to your tank, to unique weaponry and materials that regenerate your health. Cleaning up the battlefield often means the difference between victory or defeat, so it's a good idea to always keep an eye on what drops. Control wise, it can be a bit tricky at first, but after some time with the game it all soon becomes second nature, as well as getting to grips with some of the more unique abilities of your tank, such as dodges and strafing that even out your chances against the enemy. Tiny Tank is a game that is not going to hold your hand. At times it can be rather difficult, but thanks to the sense of accomplishment that comes with clearing a stage or finally taking out a boss, it's something that makes it all the more worth it. Overall, it's a great game to sink some hours into. It's not exactly groundbreaking, but it does provide a really enjoyable experience and level of difficulty that will surely keep you coming back time and time again. Ray Crisis is an action shooter that sees you taking up the role of a pilot of a fighter jet as you try to restore balance to the world. Surprisingly, the story plays a huge role throughout the experience, and depending on how well you perform will determine which ending you receive. Because of this, a nice amount of replay value is afforded to the game and promotes subsequent playthroughs after completing it. Now jumping into gameplay is where Ray Crisis begins to shine. As you would expect, a huge variety of weaponry and power-ups are on offer that makes taking on the hordes of enemies all the more manageable. You have a traditional laser attack as well as a lock-on ability and devastating bombs that should be reserved for some of the more challenging boss fights you'll be encountering. One aspect of the gameplay that helps it stand out though is the concept of something known as encroachment. In the top right corner is a percentage amount that slowly rises throughout playing. It goes down every time you kill an enemy. If the percentage reaches 100, then the player will be punished by not being able to take on several mini-bosses and will just get taken straight to the last boss. It might sound a bit strange at first, but the encroachment mechanic motivates you to be aggressive, and it adds a real sense of urgency to the on-screen action. Visually, Ray Crisis is quite impressive as well, with the use of fully 3D environments and enemies that take full advantage of the hardware. A special note are some of the bosses, which are all intricately designed and animated. Each of them are presented in unique ways, and all pose their own distinct sense of challenge. If you've never played it, now is the perfect time to pick it up and give it a go for yourself. There's an absolute ton of outstanding fighting games on the PS1. From Street Fighter to Tekken and Soul Blade, players are literally spoiled for choice on the system. But like most consoles, many games go by unnoticed, and Asuka Burning Fest has to be one of them. Now the entire game revolves around a long-standing institution of the Japanese Culture Fest. It's a school festival where each student group sponsors a play, performance or another act showing off their cultural identity. The school in Asuka Burning Fest is slightly different as they decide tried to create a fighting tournament, with each of the clubs within the school fighting for overall supremacy. As you would expect, a generous roster of characters are present in the game, each with their own distinct special abilities and movesets that makes playing around with each essential, mainly to find one that suits your style of play. Now they each possess basic attacks which can be strung together in order to create custom combos, with this aspect lying at the very heart of the game. Each and every hit that you land all contributes to a gauge that dictates your ability to use something known as Kiro Anger. This ability allows you to unleash a flurry of attacks at a slightly faster speed, and really helps out if you find yourself in a tight spot. But it's not the only mechanic in place that can help turn the tide of a battle. You've got dashes, double jumps and parries that all manage to play an integral part of overcoming opponents. And to top it all off, it plays like an absolute dream. If you've exhausted the usual suspects in the genre, Asuka Burning Fest is definitely one to add to your list. Hogs of War is a turn-based strategy game that shares much in common with the likes of Worms. You get to choose from a small group of humorously named and wonderfully equipped fighters and control them one at a time in a turn-based battle, moving them around the arena before selecting one of your many weapons to try and hurt the opposition. Now on the surface, the only difference between this and Worms is that Hogs of War is presented in full 3D. However, there is a far greater tactical aspect to the game when compared to its clear inspiration. First off, your various pigs have different careers. Because of this, they all play their own distinct role on the battlefield and could be leveled up throughout the course of the campaign, and getting your team to a point where each of them are as proficient as the last in every class type is the real objective of the game. There's a nice variety to each mission as well, which will see you visiting a whole range of locations and fulfilling specific goals that all help the gameplay from becoming stale. And adding to this is the multiplayer mode, which in my opinion is where Hogs of War truly comes into its own. Once you've completed the single player content, it's here that the game gets a second life, and could even be played against the AI if you don't have a second controller to pass to a friend. Upon its release, Hogs of War was dismissed as an unoriginal and blatant copy of Worms. However, it is still a great game in its own right, and deserves a spot in anyone's PlayStation collection. Sledstorm introduces players to the world of snowmobile racing and offers what has to be one of, if not the best of its kind on the system. Naturally, there's a ton of riders to choose from, as well as a whole range of sleds and tracks that help pad out the experience. From winding mountain trails to the more challenging dense forests, each location brings their own sense of difficulty, which keeps challenging the player the further they progress. To complement all of this are a generous amount of modes in which to play. The star of the show has to be the championship mode, that sees you selecting a rider and hitting the slopes, with not only how fast you complete each race counting, but also the amount of points you can accumulate through performing tricks. There are so many to pull off that learning all of them soon becomes one of the most beneficial aspects of the game, as any points that you earn can be spent on upgrading your sled, from its speed and handling right down to its stability. But it's not only tricks that can net you points. One of the best aspects of Sledstorm is its track design that includes a wide selection of shortcuts for the player to discover. And it's not just simply, oh, there's a shortcut, I'll take it. A lot of them involve hitting specific jumps in order to access, which you'll most likely miss the first time round. Sledstorm is incredible, even to this day, so if this one passed you by when it initially released, it well and truly deserves a spot in your collection as well. Gamera 2000 is another action shooter that never really got the recognition it deserved. It's all based on the popular kaiju series Gamera, and sees you fighting alongside him against a diverse range of enemies and obstacles that will stop at nothing to bring you down. It shares a lot in common with the likes of Panzer Dragoon on the Sega Saturn, and allows you to fly through the air as the game funnels you towards your goal. A quick tap of the shoulder buttons will shift your viewpoint, allowing you to easily flip the screen in 4 separate directions to see what might be chasing you or waiting for you ahead. Now, you don't really possess that much in the way of special attacks and have a pretty standard laser weapon at your side, but as I mentioned earlier, this is where Gamera comes in to save the day. The flying turtle will swoop in and lock onto enemies and take them down in a flash. Now, Gamera 2000 also impresses with a decent variety of missions for a shooter. One stage of particular note is an obvious nod to Return of the Jedi and sees your characters riding a hoverbike through a forest. In this stage, Gamera is not with you, so your co-pilot is the one doing the shooting with a one-handed laser. These diversions from the normal setup are a nice inclusion and help the action from becoming stale. And to top it off, the difficulty in the game is also extremely well balanced. Easy mode is pretty much a walk in the park, but normal provides a solid challenge, and hard is going to really test your patience. Once you've made your way through all of it, a 2-player mode is also included, which sees a friend taking on the role of Gamera. This mode is a real highlight and provided some of the best memories I have of the game. If you're looking for something entirely unique, Gamera 2000 is just waiting to answer the call. No One Can Stop Mr. Domino has to be one of the most strangest and wackiest games I've ever played on the PS1. It sees you controlling Mr. Domino, with the objective requiring you to travel through a set of stages as you plot out a path of dominoes and ultimately set them off at the end of each. Now, controlling Mr. Domino is simple enough, with the D-pad naturally dictating your direction and a simple tap of the X button dropping each of your dominoes. Scattered throughout each level are special tiles that all result in several interactions with the world once you've finished a run. Now, you only have a limited amount of dominoes to set, as when you run out, this is when they begin to fall, and what makes the game stand out are the ways in which these special tiles interact with the environment, from blowing up unsuspecting housewives to triggering events that alter the playing field. The only downside is that it's not that long, but thanks to the amount of forking paths and the increasing level of difficulty, it never begins to feel cheap or a waste of time. It may not be for everyone, as it's not your typical style of puzzle game, but overall I feel the unique aspects of the gameplay and premise propel it into one of the finest puzzlers on the system. The PlayStation 1 was no stranger to incredible RPGs, but one RPG that often gets overlooked when discussing the console is Rhapsody: A Musical Adventure. As the name suggests, music plays a huge part in the experience, and sees players taking up the role of a young girl named Cornet, who essentially dreams of finding a handsome prince. Now, you actually fulfill this dream right at the beginning of the adventure, but then it all soon goes south with the villain stepping in and turning him into stone. This naturally prompts Cornet to set out on a kingdom-wide journey to not only locate him, but to bring justice upon those that harmed him. One of the main aspects that will instantly stand out are the incredible visuals that are presented in a gorgeous hand-painted fashion. Each location and NPC you'll be interacting with literally pops to life thanks to the style of this presentation, and really helps the world of Rhapsody feel alive. The battle system that's in place is turn-based in nature and really steals the show. Each party member has access to a whole range of abilities, ranging from standard attacks to more impressive acts of magic that fill the screen and devastate your enemies. Upon defeating them, they will often ask to join your party, which constantly adds new ways to tackle each battle. Naturally, you'll be gaining experience points as well as items and equipment that all increase your chances of success as well. Now, it won't be for everyone, but Rhapsody: A Musical Adventure really deserves a playthrough, especially for those who are fond of the genre. Silent Bomber sees players assuming the role of a man named Juta. He's sent on a mission to ultimately destroy a spaceship that is threatening the planet, and because of events that take place before the adventure, Juta is largely devoid of emotions, with this aspect playing a huge role in the story. Now, the plot that's present isn't anything that's going to win awards, and it's merely there just to facilitate the action, but for what it lacks in narrative flair, it more than makes up for in gameplay. Juta comes equipped with a bomb carrier strapped to each of his arms, allowing you to target specific enemies or objects that pose a threat to your progression. As you advance through the game, you'll gain greater range and the ability to drop even more explosives by collecting a specific item known as an E-chip. These E-chips play a huge role in the gameplay and can be altered on the fly, allowing you to choose from better range, shielding, or a higher amount of bombs at the cost of one of the other attributes. Because of this, it's easy to adapt to the many different situations the game throws at you, and with the E-chips often being dropped by fallen enemies or objects, they're quite easy to come across as well. Now, the experience starts off simply enough, but soon escalates in difficulty, and thanks to the wonderful level design, there is always something that will keep you on your toes. Add to this the several boss fights that litter the adventure, and it soon becomes one of the most difficult of its kind on the system. Just about everything in Silent Bomber is well executed, with the exception of the plot and the in-game movies, but for once, mistakes like these don't affect the overall quality of the game. If you never got around to it, it is one that I highly recommend. Well, that does it for today's video. Don't forget to hit subscribe and follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date on any future videos, and as always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.